The oppressive weight of 1,000 silent judgments pressed down on Amelia Hayes as she stood in the corner of the glittering ballroom. Each clinking champagne flute, every burst of manufactured laughter, felt like a stone thrown in her direction. Her ex-husband, Mark, held court across the room, his voice a smug baritone slicing through the genteel chatter. He was a man who didn't just enter a room, he conquered it. And she, by virtue of their shared past, was the ghost of a vanquished territory. She was supposed to be invisible. But tonight, a pair of intensely quiet, storm-grey eyes were watching her, and their owner was about to change the rules of the game forever. The chandeliers of the Grand Oak Ridge Hotel dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light on the city's elite. For Amelia, it was a stage for a familiar play. She adjusted the simple navy blue dress she'd bought on sale, a stark, humble vessel in a sea of glittering couture. Her attendance wasn't a choice. The annual Architects Guild Gala was a command performance for everyone at Mark's firm, including the junior drafters like her who were expected to applaud his triumphs. It had been 2 years since the divorce, but in Mark's world, her orbit was still dictated by his gravity. She nursed a glass of sparkling water, the tiny bubbles a silent, frantic fizzing that mirrored the anxiety in her chest. From across the room, Mark's laughter boomed. He was surrounded by admirers, his hand resting possessively on the small of his new girlfriend's back. A willowy blonde named Tiffany, who looked like she'd been genetically engineered to accessorize a luxury condo. Mark caught Amelia's eye and gave a dismissive smirk, a micro-expression she knew better than her own reflection. It was a look that said, "Look at you, still on the outside, still nothing." He'd said the words aloud once, during their final, brutal argument. "Without me, you're nothing, Amelia. A nobody. Just a small-town girl who got lucky for a while." The words had latched onto her soul, and some days she still struggled to pull them off. A junior partner, a nervous young man named David, sidled up to her. "Amelia, you look nice," he offered, his eyes darting nervously towards Mark, as if speaking to her was a fireable offense. "Thank you, David. You too," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She had learned to make herself small, to take up less space, to be less of a target. "The Harrison Tower project looks incredible, doesn't it?" he continued, gesturing to the large display model in the center of the room. "Mark is a genius." Amelia's eyes fell on the gleaming model. Her stomach tightened. She remembered the sleepless nights, the initial sketches she had drawn, the core concept for the sustainable energy grid that she had researched and proposed. It was her idea. A whisper of a thought she'd shared with him over dinner one night when they were still married, when she still believed they were a team. He had dismissed it then, only to unveil it months later as his own revolutionary vision. He'd won the Sterling Grant for it, a career-making achievement. Her name was nowhere on the credits. Before she could form a neutral response, Mark himself was bearing down on them, Tiffany in his wake. His presence sucked the air from her vicinity. "Well, well, look what we have here," Mark said, his voice slick with condescension. He draped an arm around David's shoulders. "Chen, my boy, you're fraternizing with the help. Be careful. Mediocrity is contagious." David paled, stammering an apology before scurrying away. Mark's focus landed squarely on Amelia. His eyes raked over her simple dress, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I'm surprised to see you here, Amelia. I figured you'd be at home, sketching another one of your quaint little birdhouses." The jab was precise, designed to remind her of her demotion from project lead to an assistant drafter who handled minor residential add-ons. "It's a mandatory event, Mark," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Ah, yes, the little people must pay tribute," he mused, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Tiffany giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Amelia's nerves. "You know," Mark continued, leaning in conspiratorially, "I was just telling Tiffany about you. I told her I was married once to a woman with these quiet ambitions, but they never went anywhere. She was just decorative. Nice to have around for a while, but ultimately forgettable. Each word was a calculated blow. He wasn't just insulting her, he was rewriting their history, erasing her contributions, her partnership, her very essence. He was making her a ghost. She could feel the stares of his colleagues, the pity, the smug satisfaction. Her cheeks burned, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of tears. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking with his. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mark," she said, her voice clear and cold. "Some of us prefer to build things that last, not just things that are tall." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before the mask of arrogance slammed back into place. But before he could retort, another voice, calm and impossibly deep, cut through the tension. "An interesting philosophy. I find the most impressive structures are the ones with the strongest foundations." The voice came from a man who had approached them so silently he seemed to have materialized from the shadows. He was tall, with a stillness that was more commanding than Mark's boisterous energy. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. His face was all sharp angles and quiet intensity, but it was his eyes that held Amelia captive. They were the color of a stormy sea, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving focus. He hadn't even glanced at Mark. Mark, for the first time all night, seemed off balance. He stared at the newcomer, a flicker of recognition and confusion on his face. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" The man finally turned his gaze to Mark, a cool, appraising look that seemed to strip away all of Mark's bluster. "No," the man said simply. He turned back to Amelia, extending a hand. "Alexander Sterling. And you are?" The name hung in the air, electric and heavy. Sterling. As in the Sterling Grant. The Sterling Foundation, the billionaire philanthropist and architectural visionary who was practically a god in their world. Mark's jaw went slack. Tiffany's perfectly painted smile froze. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, a steady anchor in the churning sea of her humiliation. "Amelia," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Amelia Hayes." Alexander Sterling held her hand for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing lightly against her knuckles. His storm-grey eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw not pity, but something else entirely, something that looked like recognition. "Amelia," he repeated, the name sounding different on his lips. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the mind behind the Harrison Towers Foundation." Alexander Sterling was a man who navigated the world by observing its patterns, its hidden structures. He saw the stress points in a steel beam, the flow of human traffic through a city square, and the subtle fractures in a human soul. From his secluded alcove overlooking the gala, he had been watching the room not as a participant, but as a sociologist. He'd come tonight out of a reluctant sense of duty, to bestow his foundation's annual grant and endure the requisite small talk. He'd expected to be bored. He was not. His attention had first been drawn to Mark Hayes. Alexander recognized the type instantly. A peacock of a man, all iridescent feathers, and a shrill, demanding cry for attention. He built monuments to his own ego, structures that scraped the sky but had no soul. Alexander had read the grant proposal for the Harrison Tower and, while technically proficient, he'd found it hollow, lacking the innovative spark he truly sought. The committee, however, had been swayed by the flash and the aggressive marketing. Alexander had signed the check, but he had not been impressed. Then he saw her, Amelia. She was a study in contrasts to the room's glittering artifice. There was a quiet strength in her posture, a defiant stillness in a room full of manic energy. She was like a well-designed building in a city of gaudy facades, understated, elegant, and built to withstand the elements. He watched as her ex-husband, the peacock, preened and postured, and he saw the way her presence was a constant, unspoken rebuke to his inflated sense of self. He continued to observe, piecing together the narrative. He saw the junior partner's nervous approach, the way he kept glancing towards Mark like a dog checking for its master's approval. He saw Mark descend upon them, his body language a declaration of ownership, not just of the space, but of the people in it. And he heard the words, carried on the room's acoustics. Mediocrity is contagious, just decorative, ultimately forgettable. Each phrase was a hammer blow, and Alexander felt a familiar, cold anger stir within him. He had known men like Mark his entire life. His own father had been one, a man who measured his worth by the smallness he could make others feel. A man who had looked at his own quiet, introspective son, who preferred blueprints to balance sheets, and declared him a disappointment. Alexander had spent years building an empire, not of money, but of integrity, brick by brick, project by project, to prove that strength didn't need to shout. When he saw Mark lean in to deliver the final, cruelest cut, Alexander decided he had seen enough. He was not a man given to impulse, but this was not an impulse. It was a correction, an architectural intervention. The foundation of this little social drama was rotten, and he felt a compelling need to reinforce it. He moved with a fluid grace that belied his size, weaving through the chattering groups without seeming to disturb a single conversation. He arrived at the precise moment Amelia raised her chin, her voice clear and defiant. Some of us prefer to build things that last, not just things that are tall. It was in that moment that his hypothesis was confirmed. She was the architect. Mark was just the brand. His introduction of himself was a strategic detonation. He saw the name register on Mark's face, the immediate cascade from arrogance to shock to fawning panic. It was a predictable and pathetic demolition, but his focus was on Amelia. He saw the tremor in her hand as he took it, the confusion and fear warring in her eyes. He felt the delicate strength in her grip, a current of resilience that all of Mark's bullying could not extinguish. When he spoke, he chose his words as carefully as he would choose the cornerstone of a skyscraper. It's a pleasure to finally meet the mind behind the Harrison Towers foundation. He'd taken a calculated risk. He didn't know for sure, not with absolute certainty. But he'd seen a flicker of something in her file when he'd reviewed the grant finalists. A list of junior staff, an early concept draft with a different name attached that had been quickly superseded by Mark's. It was a loose thread, one he hadn't pulled on at the time. Now he was yanking it with intent. The shock in her eyes was his answer. It was pure, unadulterated astonishment, followed by a wave of raw, unguarded vulnerability. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. For the first time, someone saw through the facade and recognized the truth of her work. Mark sputtered, his face a mottled red. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Sterling. I was the lead architect on the Harrison project. Amelia was a junior. Alexander didn't even grant him a glance. His attention was wholly on Amelia. A building's foundation is its most critical element, he said, his voice low and meant only for her. It's the part no one sees, but it determines whether the structure stands or crumbles. It requires foresight, precision, and an understanding of the unseen forces at play. It's the work of a master, not a junior. He let go of her hand, but the connection lingered. He felt a profound, almost protective pull towards this woman. He saw the years of quiet erasure she had endured, the theft of her voice and her vision. He had the power to restore it, and the desire to do so was overwhelming. It was more than just a whim, more than a desire to smite a bully. It was a sense of profound cosmic justice waiting to be enacted. He, Alexander Sterling, the man who reshaped skylines, was about to redesign a life. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. I believe my foundation is hosting a private tour of the new modern art wing next week. I'd be honored if you would join me, Ms. Hayes. I have a feeling we have a great deal to discuss about architecture. He turned and walked away, leaving a crater of stunned silence in his wake. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew the first stone of a new foundation had just been laid. The week that followed the gala was a surreal dream for Amelia. She went to work, sat at her small drafting table in the corner, and tried to pretend that the world hadn't tilted on its axis. But it had. The atmosphere at the firm was thick with whispered gossip and sidelong glances. Mark avoided her entirely, his fury a palpable energy she could feel from across the office. David Chen had left a coffee on her desk one morning with a sticky note that simply read, "Wow." She was no longer a ghost. She was a question mark. The invitation from Alexander Sterling's office arrived via courier, a thick, cream-colored card that felt impossibly heavy in her hands. It confirmed the private tour, just as he'd promised. For 3 days, she debated not going. The encounter felt like a fluke, a billionaire's momentary whim. What could he possibly want with her? Mark's voice was a venomous echo in her mind. "You're nothing. He's playing with you. He'll see what I see and discard you." But another, quieter voice, one she hadn't heard in years, urged her on. It was the voice of the young woman who had graduated top of her class, the one who believed architecture could change the world. It was the voice that Alexander Sterling had, for a fleeting moment, seemed to hear. So, on a crisp autumn afternoon, she found herself standing before the imposing glass and steel facade of the new Chandler Wing at the Museum of Modern Art. The museum was closed to the public, and the silence was vast and humbling. A severe-looking woman with a clipboard and an earpiece met her at the door. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Sterling is waiting for you." She was led through cavernous, empty galleries where masterpieces hung in silence, their vibrant colors muted in the afternoon light. She felt as out of place as her sail-rack dress had at the gala. Then she saw him. He was standing in the center of the main atrium, a soaring space of concrete and light, his hands in the pockets of his dark trousers, looking up at the intricate network of trusses supporting the glass ceiling. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, just a simple grey cashmere sweater that made him seem younger, more approachable. He turned as she approached, and a slow, genuine smile transformed his intense features. "Amelia, I'm glad you came." "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice formal. "Alexander, please," he corrected gently. "And I should be thanking you. It's not often I get to discuss the structural integrity of a building with someone who might actually appreciate it." He gestured upwards. "What do you think? They wanted to hide the support system. I insisted it be the main feature, honesty in design." Amelia looked up, truly seeing it for the first time. "It's beautiful," she breathed, forgetting her nervousness. "It's like a mechanical forest. You're showing the building's bones, not hiding them. It's confident." His smile widened. "Confident. I like that." He began to walk, and she fell into step beside him. "Your ex-husband's designs are not confident. They're loud. There's a difference." The casual mention of Mark sent a jolt through her, but Alexander's tone was observational, not gossipy. It was as if he were discussing a flawed blueprint. "Loudness gets you noticed," Amelia said quietly, the words tasting of bitter experience. "It gets you noticed," he agreed, "but it doesn't get you remembered, not for the right reasons. Tell me about the energy grid for the Harrison Tower, the geothermal exchange system. It was the most innovative part of the entire proposal, but the final schematic seemed diluted, simplified." Amelia's heart began to beat faster. This was it, the question she hadn't dared to hope for. She took a deep breath, the clean, cool air of the museum filling her lungs. "The original plan was more ambitious," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "It involved a closed-loop system that could not only heat and cool the building, but also channel excess energy back into the city's power grid during off-peak hours. It would have made the tower not just carbon-neutral, but carbon-negative." She talked for 10 minutes straight, the words pouring out of her. She spoke of thermal coefficients and subsurface rock porosity, of the simulations she had run on her home computer late at night. The passion she had suppressed for years bubbled to the surface, and her hands began to move, sketching invisible diagrams in the air. Alexander listened, his gaze never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt. He just absorbed her words, his expression one of deep, unwavering concentration. When she finally finished, breathless and a little dizzy, he was silent for a long moment. "He stole it," Alexander said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Amelia's eyes welled with tears. She refused to let fall. She just nodded, a single jerky movement. "And he simplified it because he didn't fully understand it," Alexander continued, his voice soft but edged with steel. "He understood the buzzwords, but not the mechanics. So he filed down the edges, sanded away the genius of it until it was just another bullet point in a press release." They stopped in front of a massive, abstract painting, a chaotic swirl of blacks and greys with a single defiant slash of brilliant red. "He told everyone I was nothing," Amelia whispered, the confession hanging in the silent gallery. "And after a while, I started to believe him." Alexander turned to face her. He was standing close, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. Instead, he looked at her with that same unnerving intensity from the gala, as if he were seeing the very framework of her being. "He was wrong," Alexander said, his voice a low murmur. "A person who can conceive of a system like the one you just described is not nothing. They are a creator. Mark Hayes, he's just a salesman. He sells other people's creations." He gestured to the painting. He would see the black and grey. "You, Amelia, you are the red." In that vast, empty room, surrounded by silent works of art, Amelia felt a fundamental shift within herself. It was the feeling of a cracked foundation being repaired, of load-bearing walls being set back into place. It wasn't just that he believed her. It was that he saw her, the real her, the one she had kept hidden away for years, locked behind a door of fear and shame. Alexander Sterling had just handed her the key. "I have a proposal for you, Amelia," he said, his tone shifting from personal to professional, though the intensity remained. "The Sterling Foundation is launching a new initiative, a laboratory for sustainable urban design. We're looking for a director, someone with vision, with confidence, with a belief in building things that last." He held her gaze, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. "I think that person is you." Accepting Alexander's offer was the single most terrifying and exhilarating decision of Amelia's life. It meant quitting her job at Mark's firm, a move that felt like leaping from a cliff, even if that cliff was a toxic, soul-crushing place. She typed her resignation letter on a Sunday night, her hands shaking so badly she kept misspelling words. She didn't deliver it to Mark in person. She left it on his desk before anyone else arrived at the office Monday morning, a small, quiet act of rebellion. She didn't wait for the explosion. She just walked away, the click of the closing door behind her the sweetest sound she had ever heard. The Sterling Foundation's Urban Design Lab wasn't a lab in the traditional sense. It was a sun-drenched, open-plan loft space in a renovated warehouse district with exposed brick walls, gleaming hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. It was a blank canvas, her canvas. For the first week, she was the sole employee. She walked the empty space, running her hands over the cool steel beams and the rough texture of the brick, feeling the building's history and its future potential. It was a space built with integrity, she thought, a space with confident bones. Alexander gave her complete autonomy. "Hire who you need," he'd said. "Pursue the projects you believe in. My only requirement is that you don't let convention be your guide." He was a constant but unobtrusive presence. He'd stop by the lab in the late afternoon, often with 2 cups of coffee in hand, and they would talk for hours. They rarely discussed Mark or her past. Instead, they talked about ideas. They debated the merits of kinetic facades versus living walls, the future of modular construction, the social responsibility of an architect. He challenged her, pushed her, treated her not as a fragile thing to be protected, but as an intellectual equal whose opinions he genuinely valued. One evening they were bent over a set of blueprints for a potential low-income housing project, the city lights twinkling outside the massive window. "The problem is always the budget," Amelia said, sighing as she tapped a finger on the cost analysis sheet. "To make it truly sustainable and beautiful, the material costs go up. The developers will want to cut corners, and the first things to go will be the green roof and the community courtyard. Then we change the equation," Alexander said simply. He took a pen and decisively crossed out the developer's name. "The Sterling Foundation will fund the pilot project directly. We build it ourselves, exactly to your specifications. We prove that ethical design can also be profitable. We create a new model." Amelia stared at him, stunned. "Just like that? You just fund the whole thing?" "It's not just like that," he corrected, his expression serious. "It's a strategic investment in a philosophy I believe in, and in a person I believe in." His gaze was steady, and in that moment the line between professional and personal blurred into non-existence. He began inviting her out after their work discussions. It started with simple dinners at quiet, out-of-the-way restaurants where no one would recognize them. There, amidst the soft clink of silverware and the murmur of other people's lives, they talked about everything but architecture. She learned about his strained relationship with his late father, his love for sailing, his frustration with the superficiality of the world he inhabited. He had all the money and power anyone could dream of. Yet he confessed to feeling a profound sense of isolation. She, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she never had with Mark. She told Alexander about her childhood in a small town, her dream of building homes that felt like sanctuaries, her fear that she had lost that part of herself forever. "You never lost it," he told her one night, his hand covering hers on the table. "You just misplaced the blueprints." His touch was electric, but it wasn't aggressive or possessive. It was a gesture of connection, of quiet understanding. The relationship was a slow burn, a gradual restoration of Amelia's trust in another person and, more importantly, in herself. He never rushed her, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He was patient, as if he were waiting for a rare flower to bloom, content to simply watch the process. The change in Amelia was palpable. She started dressing with more confidence, not in expensive clothes, but in colors that made her feel alive. A crimson scarf, a cobalt blue blouse. She spoke up in meetings with city planners, her voice clear and steady. She hired a small, brilliant team for the lab, and together they began to work on the housing project, their shared passion infusing the space with an infectious energy. She was not just healing, she was thriving. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be. One rainy Saturday, Alexander took her to a small, independent bookstore, a shared love they had discovered. As they browsed the shelves, their shoulders brushing, the scent of old paper and rain in the air, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. He pulled out a book of poetry and, in a low voice, read a short verse about the sea. His voice was a deep, soothing rumble, and she felt herself leaning into it, into him. He closed the book and looked at her, his storm-grey eyes soft in the dim light. "Amelia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He raised his hand and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered for a moment, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down her spine. The world outside, the rain, the city, it all faded away. There was only the quiet space between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. It was no longer about gratitude or a professional alliance. It was something deeper, something real and terrifying and beautiful. He was no longer just her benefactor. He was becoming her foundation. Mark Hayes experienced the news of Amelia's new position not as a single event, but as a series of increasingly infuriating paper cuts. The first was her terse resignation letter, an act of defiance so unexpected it left him momentarily speechless. He had expected tears, pleading, a desperate negotiation. Instead, he got 2 weeks' notice on his desk and an empty chair in the corner of the office. He told everyone she'd had a breakdown, that the pressure had been too much for her. It was a narrative that was easy for his sycophants to believe. The second cut was the announcement in the Architectural Chronicle, a sleek full-page feature on the new Sterling Urban Design Lab. There was a photo of Amelia standing in the sunlit loft, looking not broken but radiant, confident. The article quoted Alexander Sterling himself, referring to his new director, Amelia Hayes, as one of the most innovative minds in sustainable design today. Mark had thrown the journal across his office, the glossy pages scattering like fallen birds. But the deepest cut, the one that festered and refused to heal, came from the whispers. He heard it at lunches, at board meetings, on the golf course. The story of the gala had taken on a life of its own, morphing and twisting with each retelling. In the new version, the heroic Alexander Sterling had swooped in to save the brilliant but oppressed Amelia from her tyrannical ex-husband. Mark, the titan of industry, was being recast as the villain in a fairy tale. His projects, once lauded, were now being scrutinized. Anonymous comments on industry blogs began to question the true origins of the Harrison Tower concept. His carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of stolen ideas and projected arrogance, was beginning to show cracks. "It's a joke, right?" he snarled at Tiffany one evening in their sterile white-on-white apartment. He paced the floor, a caged animal in a minimalist zoo. "Amelia? A director? She can barely direct a conversation. Sterling is sleeping with her. It's the only possible explanation." Tiffany, who was busy taking a selfie, looked up with a vacant expression. "Maybe you should have been nicer to her, honey. That Sterling guy is like super rich." Her simplistic observation earned her a glare so venomous it made her flinch. "I was a god to her," he roared, slamming his fist on the marble countertop. "I gave her everything. This is what I get for wasting 10 years on a charity case. She's making a fool of me." The jealousy was a physical sickness, a sour acid that churned in his gut. He began to stalk her in a digital sense. He followed the Sterling Foundation's social media, obsessively scrolling through pictures of the lab's progress. He saw Amelia leading a team, pointing at blueprints, laughing with her colleagues. In every photo, she looked more vibrant, more alive than he had ever seen her. It was a personal affront. She was supposed to be nothing without him, a faded photograph from his past. Instead, she was developing into a full-color masterpiece, and he wasn't even in the frame. His work began to suffer. His pitches became more aggressive, his designs more grandiose and desperate. He lost a major bid for a new concert hall, the rejection letter citing a lack of soulful connection to the community, a critique so vague and insulting it sent him into a rage. He started drinking more heavily, his evenings dissolving into a haze of expensive scotch and paranoid resentment. The final straw was the invitation. It was for the groundbreaking ceremony of the Sanctuary Project, Amelia's low-income housing initiative. The name itself was a jab, a reference to the very dreams he had once mocked. The invitation, addressed to his firm, made it clear that attendance by industry leaders was expected. It was a power move, orchestrated by Sterling, and he knew it. He was being summoned to witness her coronation. He sat in his office, the thick cardstock feeling flimsy in his trembling hands. He could see it all. Amelia at a podium, Sterling by her side, the press flashing cameras in her face. He imagined the polite, pitying smiles from his colleagues. The narrative would be complete. The victim had become the victor. The king had been dethroned by the nothing he had cast aside. An ugly, desperate plan began to form in his mind. He couldn't let it happen. He had built his entire identity on the foundation of his superiority, and her success was a wrecking ball aimed directly at it. He wouldn't let her have that victory. If he couldn't have the credit, he would take the glory. He would expose her. He would remind everyone, and most importantly, her, what she really was. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of a notorious tabloid journalist, a man who owed him a favor. "Walters," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I have a story for you, the real story about the Sterling Foundation's new pet project. It's a story of ambition, sex, and betrayal. Let's talk about the very, very fragile foundation of Amelia Hayes." He would create a storm so fierce it would tear down everything she had built, leaving her exposed and shivering in the ruins. Because if he was going down, he was going to take her with him. The Sanctuary Project became Amelia's entire world. It was more than steel and concrete. It was the physical manifestation of her redemption. She poured all of herself into it. Her resurrected dreams, her newfound confidence, her unwavering belief that architecture could serve, not just dominate. The long hours in the lab were invigorating. The challenges of sourcing sustainable materials and navigating city permits were puzzles she was eager to solve. For the first time in over a decade, she felt not just competent, but powerful. Her relationship with Alexander was the quiet, steady scaffolding that supported this new construction. It progressed with a natural, unhurried ease. The first time he kissed her, it wasn't a dramatic, cinematic moment, but a soft, gentle kiss on her doorstep after a long day, a simple acknowledgement of the deep affection that had grown between them. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. Being with him felt like breathing clean air after years in a smoke-filled room. He championed her mind, celebrated her successes, and on the rare days when self-doubt crept back in, he didn't dismiss her fears. He listened. "Sometimes I feel like an imposter," she confessed to him one night, curled up on the sofa in his minimalist, art-filled apartment overlooking the city. "Like at any moment, someone is going to pull back the curtain and reveal that I'm still just that small-town girl playing dress-up." Alexander set aside the book he was reading and gave her his full attention. "That small-town girl is the one who envisioned this," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the window, towards the city she was trying to improve. "She's your foundation, Amelia. Why would you be ashamed of a strong foundation?" He didn't try to fix her. He just reframed the narrative, turning what she saw as a weakness into a source of strength. Yet, despite this profound sense of peace and purpose, the ghost of Mark's abuse lingered. It was a hairline fracture in her new foundation, invisible to the naked eye but vulnerable to seismic shocks. Sometimes, in moments of high stress, she would hear his voice in her head, whispering his cruel assessments. "You're not smart enough. You're going to fail. Everyone will see you for the fraud you are." The pressure mounted as the groundbreaking ceremony for the Sanctuary Project approached. The project was attracting significant media attention, not just for its innovative design, but for the human interest story Sterling's PR team had carefully crafted around Amelia. She was being positioned as a visionary, a rising star. The spotlight felt hot and unfamiliar, and it illuminated the dark corners of her psyche where her deepest insecurities hid. One afternoon, a week before the ceremony, a senior city planner, a gruff, old-school bureaucrat, tore into her schematics for the building's greywater recycling system. He was condescending, dismissive, and his arguments were nearly identical to the ones Mark used to use to shut down her ideas. "It's overly complicated, Ms. Hayes, a flight of fancy. It will never pass the final inspection," he'd said with a smug finality. Amelia left the meeting feeling shaken, the old, familiar shame washing over her. She returned to the lab, her confident arguments and data points forgotten, replaced by the crushing weight of the planner's dismissal. Her team looked at her for guidance, but for a moment she had none to give. The director, the visionary, had vanished, and in her place was the small, defeated woman from the gala. She locked herself in her office, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "He's right. It's too ambitious. I'm going to fail. Mark was right." Her phone rang. It was Alexander. She ignored it. She couldn't speak to him, couldn't let him hear the weakness in her voice. But a few minutes later, there was a soft knock on her office door. He walked in, his face etched with concern. He must have heard about the meeting. "Amelia," he said gently. "He hated it," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He said it was a flight of fancy. He thinks I'm a fool." Alexander didn't immediately defend her. He walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline. 20 years ago, he began, his voice calm and even, I proposed my first solo project, a cantilevered observation deck for a corporate headquarters. My father, who was on the board, stood up in the middle of my presentation and called it a grossly irresponsible and structurally unsound vanity project. He said I was going to bankrupt the company and kill people. He publicly humiliated me. Amelia looked up, her own misery momentarily forgotten. "I went home," Alexander continued, "and I almost scrapped the whole thing." His voice was the only one I could hear. But then my mentor called me, an old, brilliant engineer. He said, "Alexander, small minds will always be intimidated by bold designs. It's not the structure they fear is unsound. It's their own." He turned to face her, his grey eyes piercing. "That city planner is a small man, Amelia. He has been approving the same boring concrete boxes for 30 years. Your design challenges him. It scares him. Just like your ideas scared Mark." He walked over and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "This has nothing to do with your competence. This is the death rattle of the old guard. You are the future, and it terrifies them. Do not let the ghosts of old failures haunt the halls of your success." His words were a balm to her wounded spirit. He wasn't just comforting her, he was arming her. He was reminding her that the psychological conflict she was experiencing wasn't a sign of her weakness, but a byproduct of her strength. The battle wasn't just with city planners or bitter ex-husbands, it was with the lingering echo of her own past trauma, and it was a battle she was finally equipped to win. She took a deep, steadying breath and squeezed his hands. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She stood up and walked over to her desk, unrolling the blueprints for the greywater system. His objections were based on outdated regulations. "I can write a supplementary proposal with updated data to prove its efficacy." Alexander smiled, a slow, proud smile. "I have no doubt you can." As she went back to work, a new resolve hardening within her, she realized that this was the true test. The groundbreaking ceremony would be a public declaration of her success, but this quiet moment of overcoming her own demons, this was the true victory. The foundation was holding. The day of the groundbreaking was bright and cold, the autumn sun sharp in a cloudless blue sky. The site for the sanctuary project was buzzing with energy. A large white tent had been erected, filled with chairs for city officials, community leaders, and the press. A small stage stood before a plot of upturned earth, with a row of silver shovels gleaming in the sun. Amelia stood to the side of the stage, clutching a sheaf of notes she had rewritten a dozen times. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a deep, quiet hum of pride. Her team from the lab was in the front row, beaming at her. Alexander stood a few feet away, talking to the mayor, but he caught her eye and gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. She was ready. As the guests were taking their seats, a commotion near the entrance of the tent drew her attention. Mark had arrived. He wasn't just in attendance, he was making an entrance. He strode in, flanked by the sleazy journalist Walters, who had a camera crew in tow. Mark looked disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled, his face puffy and flushed. There was a desperate, wild look in his eyes. He ignored the event organizers trying to intercept him and marched directly towards the press section, pulling Walters with him. "A few questions for the project director before we begin," he shouted, his voice slurring slightly. The cameras immediately swiveled from the stage to him. Alexander started moving towards them, his face a thunderous mask, but Amelia put a hand on his arm. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Let him. This needs to be done. My way." Alexander searched her eyes, saw the steel there, and reluctantly stopped. Walters, seizing the moment, pushed a microphone towards Amelia. "Ms. Hayes, Jerry Walters, City Beat. Is it true that the core concepts for this project were actually developed while you were married to architectural giant Mark Hayes? That these ideas were in fact his?" The question hung in the cold air, a poisoned dart. The crowd murmured. Amelia could feel every eye on her. The old Amelia would have crumbled. She would have shrunk, denied, stammered, and in doing so, confirmed their suspicions. But she was not the old Amelia. She walked calmly to the podium, adjusting the microphone. She looked directly into the camera lens, bypassing Walters entirely. "Thank you for the question, Jerry," she said, her voice even and clear, resonating through the speakers. "It's true that I was married to Mark Hayes, and it's true that many ideas were discussed during our time together. Ideas about integrity, about honesty, about what it means to build something that truly serves a community rather than just an ego." She paused, letting the words sink in. Mark's face darkened. "But the vision for the Sanctuary Project, its foundation of sustainability, compassion and innovation, is entirely my own," she continued, her voice gaining power. "It was born from my belief that everyone deserves a place of beauty and safety to call home. This project is not a continuation of my past. It is the beginning of my future." Mark, seeing his planned ambush failing, lost control. He shoved past the journalist and lunged towards the stage. "She's lying," he yelled, his voice raw with fury and booze. "She's a fraud. She was nothing until Sterling picked her out of the gutter. Ask him what he paid for his little pet project." 2 security guards moved to intercept him, but it was too late. He had made it to the edge of the stage, his face contorted in an ugly sneer. "She was my junior drafter. She fetched my coffee. Tell them, Amelia, tell them what you were without me." The crowd gasped. The scene was devolving into a train wreck. Amelia looked down at the man who had haunted her for years. He looked small, pathetic, a collapsing structure built on a rotten foundation, and she felt nothing, no fear, no shame, only a profound, weary pity. She leaned into the microphone one last time. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos with absolute clarity. "You are right about one thing, Mark," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "When I was with you, I was nothing, because you made it your life's work to convince me of that. You took my ideas and called them your own. You took my confidence and called it arrogance. You took my love and called it a convenience. You tried to erase me." She took a deep breath, standing straight and tall, a skyscraper of a woman. But a person's worth isn't determined by who they're standing next to. It's determined by what they build. And today, she gestured to the upturned earth, to the hopeful faces in the crowd, to the city skyline behind her. "I am building something real, something that will last. And you have built nothing but a legacy of theft and intimidation. So you are right. I was nothing with you. But without you, I have finally become everything I was meant to be." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Mark stood frozen, exposed and stripped bare by the simple, devastating truth. The security guards finally reached him and gently but firmly escorted him away, a sputtering, defeated man. Amelia looked out at the crowd. The mayor was staring at her with newfound respect. Her team was in tears, a mixture of pride and relief, and Alexander was looking at her with an expression of such profound love and admiration that it took her breath away. She picked up one of the silver shovels. She walked to the edge of the stage, plunged it into the soft earth, and lifted the first piece of ground for her new beginning. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment not of a victim, but of a victor. The architect, finally, of her own magnificent life. Amelia's journey from the shadows of a toxic past to the bright, open space of her own creation is a testament to the quiet strength of the human spirit. She didn't need a prince to save her. She needed a partner who would hand her the blueprints to her own forgotten dreams. Together, Amelia and Alexander didn't just build structures of steel and glass. They built a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and a love that was stronger than any skyscraper. Her story reminds us that our worth is not defined by those who try to diminish us, but by the courage we find to build ourselves back up, one brick, one blueprint, one belief at a time. If Amelia's story of betrayal and redemption resonated with you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, and subscribe for more emotional stories that feel like real life.